The first Abel's book audio version was 14 hours long. This one is 7. Something tells me somebody got an editor. If you haven't seen my first video on the Abel's book, please do check it out now. I'll link it up there and also down there. It's long, yes, but it's still way shorter than reading the actual book, so that's what I call time management. Plus, it's like my best video to date and the one that I'm most proud of, so if you have some time, please give it a looky-looky. Strings is the second book in the Abel's trilogy? Series? Chronicles? After I made this video, which I probably should have done this before I made the video, I watched some of his videos, and he says in there that there will be 4 of them. 4 in total, 3 after the original Abel's book. There was the first one that came out 5 years ago, and then was re-released this last year in 2019, and now there is this one, Strings, which has been released this month in August of 2020. Hey everyone, it's Editing Nerb here. Okay, so apparently I got a couple things wrong in my first recording of this video, so I just want to correct those errors real quick. So I said that the first Abel's book was released in 2015 and then re-released in 2019, which is true, that is still true. But then I said that the second book, Strings, was released in 2020, a year later, and I think I even said that it was released in this month. That is not true. The reason why I thought that this was the case is because when I went onto the Abel's website, the option to pre-order the Strings book was still available, to the point where I thought that it was still coming out in some capacity and that I just managed to get my hands on a copy, and I thought myself very lucky. No, it came out a year ago, the website just has not been updated, and honestly, I don't know why I just accepted that so readily. I even very clearly remember seeing it say 2020 on Amazon when it obviously says 2019, so I don't know what that was about. That was just my brain being stupid, I guess. But yeah, so Strings actually came out in 2019 then, and that means that there is a book that is to be released this next month in September. There's a third book, it's called Currents, and it does exist and it will be coming out, and I had no idea that this was coming out this year because I thought Strings had come out this year, so I guess I have another book to review, which is nice, I guess. But anyway, I think that's all. I think that's all that I wanted to say here. Sorry for that mistake, and I guess we will get back to the video. That is 5 years in between the writing of book 1 and book 2. I did not like the first one. I did not like it 5 years ago when I read it, and I did not like it last week when I read it. But hey, 5 years is a long time. I'm definitely a better writer and better storyteller than I was 5 years ago, and there's no reason to believe that he wouldn't be as well. I would also be really happy to see growth in this story and in this book and in his writing. So, Strings by Jeremy Scott. Major spoilers ahead, by the way. It starts off already much better than the last one. The book opens and things actually start happening. Philip, our main lad still, and his 2 best friends, Henry and Bentley, if you remember them, are on a plane with him where they're headed home after a few weeks of letting loose, going to Disneyland, enjoying childish things. This is to get some them time after all of the trauma that they've gone through since they were 12. They are 15 now at the start of this book, meaning about 3 years have passed in between books. And we get some quick exchanges to kind of clear up what we've missed, both in dialogue and exposition. First of all, they talk about how James, he was the other blind kid from the last book who could teleport, and also he was a decent part of the Abel's gang. Look, he's even on the cover. Well, he's dead now. When I read that, I was like, wait, when? Because I don't remember him dying in the first book. I feel like that's something I would have remembered. And he seemed important enough to not just kill off screen in between books. And then there were also several mentions of the boys having defeated 2 of the biggest threats to mankind ever, and I was again like, wait, when? I honestly thought for a moment that I had completely skipped an entire book, that this was the 3rd book in a trilogy, and I just had not realized that there was a second one. And so I looked it up, and I found out that Strings is the second one, so I was just even more confused until just a couple minutes ago when I actually looked it up again, and apparently there is a comic book in between the first and second books. It's a tie-in comic. I did not know that, so I might check that out too. We'll see. So because there's this tie-in comic that I never knew about, and then there's these 2 books that take place 3 years apart from each other all at once, it is a lot. There's a lot of information being thrown at you, but at least it's not taking an hour. It really did feel a lot like a middle book or an unmarketed comic book was missing from in between these 2 stories. But still, aging up the characters from 12 to 15 actually really fits better with the author's voice and style, and the narrative structure. So I do believe it was beneficial, and I do think it was a good call. Some part of me actually kind of wishes he would have started here, because I hate the first book, but this one's not too bad. It is, first of all, much quicker than the first book. We get all caught up, and then event. The plane's engines go out. So right off the bat, we get a lot of action, and we get to see the 3 main characters at this point use their powers together and work together, and we get to see how that looks after 3 years. It is still, unfortunately, most of his friends just being there to support his own heroism, but more on that later. Bentley, the super brain, has created glasses that Henry wears that shows him his own view of things, and then also, like, Philip's view, so that he can send them both to Philip, and Philip can just focus on his own view, so that way they can both see at the same time what they're supposed to be seeing from their own points of view. More on that later. We find out that after the events of the first book, the cat is now out of the bag, and the world knows about superheroes at this point. And they are not happy to know that these superheroes exist among them. Custodians, if you remember, that's what they call superheroes in this world. Custodians are seen as very dangerous and are constantly being hunted down and detained, using their powers to save everyone. And I do mean the friends using their powers to support Philip in saving everyone is very risky, but they decide to do it anyway. Bentley hacks the cameras to see, but then when that doesn't work, they use Henry's brain powers to hack into the pilot's brain and see what the pilot's seeing, and send that feed to Philip so that he can see where to drive the plane as he's using his telekinesis to hold it up. So that is also, there's this big jump in their abilities between books. And I mean, like, yes, it's been 3 years, but it is also weird that we as an audience don't get to go on that journey with them. So then in the scene, Jeremy Scott did it, my dudes. After 5 years of not even getting a chortle out of me, he made me laugh out loud. It is in this scene. So Philip and Henry are arguing in their minds. Philip needs to see. Henry is like, I don't know how to get the pilot to look up because the pilot's looking at the panels. And he's like, just ask him. And he's like, that's just gonna scare him. And he's like, come on, we need to do this. And they're fighting and bickering. And so Henry's like, finally like, okay, fine, I'll do it. And so Henry goes into the pilot's brain and he goes, pilot, I need you to look out the window. This is, God. And I laughed. I thought it was funny, and that was nice, because I didn't laugh at all in the first book unless it was a pained and saddened and I want to throw this against a window laugh, which I don't know if you've had many of those in your life, but they are very fun. So they land the plane and they do it in a way so that no one really sees them specifically do it, but because it was obviously custodians, everyone on the plane gets flagged. At this point, they now know that if they get flagged again, they'll likely end up being arrested. This is our main focus for most of the book. They want to be heroes, but the threats are now elevated because if anyone even sees them, they will more than likely get detained. At this point, there's also a mention of a new Maestro character that they keep hearing about, which based on the cover, I really thought was going to be like the main conflict and the big villain. And it is a bit. It's just that they don't really mention this Maestro character again until the end, and they never call them the Maestro or the Maestro character again either. It's almost like this line was thrown in last minute to convey more foreshadowing, because even after faced with this Maestro character, everything about them, even that they exist at all in any capacity, seems like very new information to our characters. So they get home and they're congratulated by Philip's dad, and then the other two boys talk about how their parents are not going to be happy, and then they leave, and then they kind of move on. So at the school, we then see that the Ables have grown significantly. Since the events of the last book, they basically say that more and more kids than ever were disabled in those incidents, and so now the special ed class for disabled kids is bigger than ever. And because Philip and his friends are so popular after what they did in the first book, which honestly wasn't much, the original trio is now quite popular, especially Philip, who everyone likes, and we know this because it's told to us a lot. My thing is, I don't really understand why they're liked so much. It says because of the events of the first book and how they saved the day, and maybe the comic ties more of that, like they saved the day again, so maybe that has more to do with it. But honestly, in the first book, they didn't save the day. They tried to save the day and then failed miserably, and it was entirely Philip's fault that anybody was in danger to begin with. It wasn't his fault, that's victim blaming. But they were going after him, and then they were going to hurt everybody else as a result of them going after him. And so Philip didn't do anything. They tried, but they failed. The person who saved everybody was Donnie, and I know that it says at the end of the book that they still got the credit for that, but the fact that they bask in this credit so much it just feels a little weird. And then there's this new girl, Emmeline, and she has epilepsy, and she is a transporter. And Philip is very infatuated with her. She's obviously here to be his love interest now. So because she is a teleporter, and because she comes in so quickly after the mention of James being dead, remember James is also a teleporter, for a moment, and this could be wrong because again, like the comic, I don't know, but it kind of felt like James was killed off to make room for Emmeline, and that felt not great. And then some of the characters who were mentioned in the first Ables book but never really got any time to do anything are now in the Ables. These are the ones whose superpowers were directly inhibited, limited, or even eliminated by their disabilities. So now they are in the Ables, but it was only after they were able to find workarounds for their disabilities. So for example, the girl who controlled weather but also was allergic to the sun is now taking the special medication that was made for for her by all the super brains so that she can now go out in the sun and she's no longer allergic to the sun. A boy who could grow huge but had really bad asthma that would make it so he could only do it for a second now has this machine that they built him that makes his asthma a lot better so he can grow and do all of his stuff. Oh, and then Philip's brother, who is not disabled, he's just like an honorary member of the Ables now, and he's super fast. In this part, there's a lot of new names and abilities and faces thrown into the mix, and I really do love a good large cast of characters, but it still feels like there's a missing piece in the timeline, like a book that could have happened in between these books, maybe a comic book that already exists, I don't know, where we could have been introduced to some more of these characters on a more progressive basis so that they're not all thrown at you at once, and that way we could actually know about them and care about them as the story goes on. So they do the superhero stuff, they're training for the super sim. The super sim never actually happens in this book. Outside Freepoint, their hometown, tensions are growing amongst superheroes and the public. The public does not like the superheroes. A lot of these custodians are getting caught doing criminal acts. In fact, it's disproportionate. Like, so many more are doing bad things than are doing good things and helping people. And so people want them to either be detained or to all be flagged or like marked. They want them to know who they are, what they can do, all of that stuff, and have that like so the government knows it. And this is where it's mentioned that there's this lady that was hired by the Secretary of State, and she is directly in charge of detaining all potential custodians, all the ones that she can find. More stuff happens, but basically the important stuff that happens is that after this, Philip's dad and then Bentley's dad both go missing. After this point, the Ables drop out of school, which they can do without getting noticed, since most of the adults at this point have either gone missing, moved away, or just are nowhere to be found anymore, or were notably detained. So they do this so that they can focus all of their time and energy into trying to find the missing people and figure out what's going on to all of these superheroes. They find a hidden office in Bentley's dad's room. He's like a super important person for the town. I think he might be the governor. I think that was what was said. And in this computer, they find a random number, and so they think it might be an IP address, but then that doesn't work out, so they think it might be a location, but then that doesn't work out, so they go, oh, it must be a Dewey Decimal number. And so they look it up, and it's this book about Chicago and like the divide between East and West. So they go to Chicago without really any further clues because it's the only one that they got, and they're trying to find whatever this clue is pointing them towards. While doing this, a car accident almost happens in front of them, and Philip uses his superpowers to stop it. This reveals their location and who they are to the authorities, who then start tracking them down. They run and they hide in an aquarium. The drone catches their faces, and then out of nowhere, Philip's dad shows up, and he's like, oh yay, my dad. But then the dad is weird and mindless and actually attacks them and yeets all of the kids into the ocean. Emmeline then teleports them all back to safety in Freepoint, and the search for answers continues. At this point, Philip and Henry have a fight. They had a fight during all of that. The tensions were high. They were arguing. After this, Philip calls him to tell him that he needs to help him break into NASA and be his eyes so that he can steal this thing with Bentley so they can make these masks that cover their identity and will hide it from anybody. Henry leaves him hanging and blocks his number, which honestly at this point, like, go Henry. Philip almost gets hurt on the mission because he can't see and he's become reliant on that now, but they do get out, and Philip then tries to make amends with Henry and figure out what's bothering him and why he's so angry with him. Henry, rightfully so, calls Philip out for using him and treating him like he's literally just there, just in existence to be his eyes. He says that this is not okay, and being his sight all the time is very inconvenient, and he was never really asked if he wanted to, and it's just expected from him, and that's just not fair, which is totally fair. It's totally fair and a great thing, and it was my complaint that I had in the last video. But Philip snaps back here and calls Henry out for not trying harder to reach his full potential, which is super rude, and it even sucks too because it comes in later, and like, Philip was right, you know, for calling him out for this, but it's like, screw you, dude. Philip apologizes, and they make amends and they're friends again, and it's wholesome or whatever, but it still wasn't resolved how I want it to be resolved because nothing really changes in their relationship from that point on either. Trying to find answers again, they run into their dad again, who is being all controlled and stuff, and Philip stays behind to fight him so everybody else can leave and gets captured. After this, everything with the secret office, the Dewey Decimal number, the location, Chicago, it literally never comes up again. I have no idea what any of it meant. So he's caught, he's in prison, and there's this implant in his hand that is explained through very monologue-y, villainy, smugness by the evil lady who is the Secretary of Defense, that there's an implant in their hands, and so if they ever try to use their superpowers, it will create the most intense and immeasurable pain upon their bodies imaginable. Thus, the prison is pretty flimsy, especially for one that's holding a bunch of superheroes, but still nobody's escaped because pain. There is this long scene where he's in prison and he's describing all of these really random, weird dreams that he's having, and it turns out that the dreams are manifestations of him being puppeted to do criminal things by the maestro person, the lady, but still, this dream sequence is way too long, and when you don't realize that it has anything to do with the plot, just reading through it is just not fun and very frustrating. It could have been way shorter, and it did not need to be that weird. The lady in charge of capturing the criminals is apparently using them to commit more crimes to turn public favor more and more against them, so that she can grab more of them and make them do more things. It's never really explained why she really wants to do this or what the end goal in all of this is, except for maybe to get rid of superheroes, but she's a superhero, so it doesn't, again, it's kind of odd. Why does she want to do this? But that's also just a trend in these books, so I guess it's whatever. He uses his telekinesis to yank the device out of his hand, which, like, why didn't you do that when you first came in here? You've been in here for like weeks now. And then he breaks out a bunch of other people and takes all their implants out, and they use your powers, and then they all escape. Him and the other Ables hide away for a while in the woods, as they know that the evil lady and company are going to be raiding their town soon. And after a bit of time, they decide to finally take some initiative and go and try and set free the prisoners from the rest of the prisons that are popping up all over the US, which they know where I think one of them is, because again, the lady monologues a lot. That's a common trend with these villains, monologuing to young boys. Philip faces off with his dad for a third time and wins with the help of his friends. And during and before all that, they do set a lot of people free as well, and then the evil lady shows up. She says that she's after somebody and that she's been doing a lot of this to get a hold of somebody specifically, and so Philip automatically assumes that she's talking about him because, again, growing trends. And this is especially after she admits that she was the one who tried to make the plane crash, which, why? Why would exposing them help with her plan? Why would putting them in danger help with her plan? If she already knew who they were and has basically unlimited authority to capture whoever she wants at this point, why did she wait so long, first of all? But then also, what was up with the plane? Like, what purpose does that serve? But it's not him, because, again, growing trends, and once again, it is the unlikely hero, the one that you would not suspect, the other person in the Ables. It is Henry. Apparently, Henry also has, like, super heightened abilities he just hasn't tapped into. Remember what I said about Philip ending up being right and how it kind of sucks? So she's figured out that if she uses him and controls him, she can control him into controlling a bunch of other people and then have control multiple people at once and then be more powerful. For what exact fulfillment? She starts using Henry to control all of the Ables, and she makes them start running around and doing criminal things like breaking into houses or whatever. Henry obtains a bit of his control and starts talking telepathically to Philip, and he basically asks Philip to kill him and says that it's the only way and that Philip needs to use his telekinesis to end his life, and Philip can't do it reasonably. That's a very hard thing to ask of your friend. And so Henry takes over Philip's body, as he now can do, and uses Philip's telekinesis to kill himself. Which, like, we've got 2 books and 1 comic, and a crucial member of our main lad's immediate circle of people who were the most important to him have died in every single one. Book 1, dead mom. Tie-in comic, dead friend. Book 2, dead best friend in the whole world. Why does this kid still want to be a superhero so bad? The whole thing is he's always like, oh, I need to protect people, I need to protect people, I want to protect people, I should protect people. And it's like, dude, you are not protecting people. People are dying all the time, and you're on watch. So the evil lady's plan is totally failed by that. Public realizes and sees, because there were cameras and also all this other stuff, that she was a superhero, she was lying to them, and also that she was very immoral in her actions, and that she was unjustly arresting and detaining all these superheroes. Even minors and like young kids were being detained by this woman, and that's apparently not great for public interest. So public favors kind of turn, and Free Point is being rebuilt, and Philip's dad wakes up and he's okay now, and their family will continue, and that's the end of the book. So what do I think? I think progress was made, honestly. It does feel like Jeremy Scott really realized and acknowledged some of the faults with his first book and tried to not erase them, but to write them into better directions. Like, especially how Philip was treating Henry, and while that wasn't resolved quite how I wanted it to be, it was still addressed, and I do respect that. The editing is also so much better, holy crap, and the random spiels are basically gone, which is amazing, and I love whoever did that. The narration is more limited, which is great, and more things are action-fueled, and more things are happening and being described to you as they're happening instead of just being told to you in hindsight that they're happening. That's great. And through the narrator, it is also much less condescending and critical, which reads much better. Story-wise, things are better. Not perfect, but better. It was much less convoluted and much less nonsensical, so bonus points for both that. 5 years really can make a big difference, but there are still a lot of problems. The ones mentioned already, and then some more. The first book did this too, but the author ruins suspense a lot, and just the way that he writes writes. In a lot of scenes, he'll basically tell you what's about to happen before it happens, so then as you're reading about it happening, it just feels less like suspenseful and energized when it's happening. He will say, like, for example, I knew though that I could do it regardless, and so then the next 5-10 minutes of him, the main character, trying to figure out how to do it become much less suspenseful when you've already been told that he knows how to do it and he will figure out how to do it. He does it less in this book than in the first one, but it is still here. Also, I never mentioned this about the first book, but there are the heroes in Freepoint, and then there are the hero support in Freepoint, and those are normal humans who just live there and help heroes. And they do come up occasionally, but very, 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 very rarely. And I almost wonder why they're even in these books, because they really don't do anything. And it wasn't even until the end of this book that they even get a mention where Philip is like, oh, I kind of forget about those people a lot. Maybe I shouldn't, because some of them got injured trying to help us, and that's not good. So maybe it will come more up in the third book, the fourth installment. And so I do hope for that, because it's just there right now and it doesn't actually have any weight. Also, because of all the workarounds, Philip's blindness is even more removed from this book than it was in the last one. It does come up occasionally, a lot more at the end than at the beginning, but it's still an occasional thing. And it happens to him more like an inconvenience than something that he has to work with and learn to live with. And because his blindness is basically just done away with in this book, as a leader of all of the disabled kids who are all like enamored by this guy and think he's the greatest person ever, and he's supposed to protect them and be their hero, until that last scenes in both book when it ends up being the person that you don't suspect, it reads a little weird. It's not quite as far as white saviory, except abled saviory, but it does lean that way. This is especially apparent because all of the characters really do seem to just exist to boost up the main character and make him more heroic and more capable of being the hero in every given situation. It isn't until the last battle that he actually steps back and lets some of his friends do things, and that was growth, definitely, but it also wasn't nearly as much growth as we should have been seeing by now. There were even some lines with Emmeline that I wasn't overly fond with. There's this scene when he says that he fell in love with her this night when she stayed over at their house, and while him and his friends were all talking and stuff, she stayed with his younger brother and tried to calm him down and get him to go to sleep after a very traumatizing day. He says that's when he fell in love with her, and it's never really painted as this image of he realized that she was so compassionate and sweet, like characteristics that belonged to her that he fell in love with. It's really painted more of a, she did this thing for me and so now I love her. And this really is very common with how Emmeline is treated in the narrative. It's very much like he gains more attraction to her the more she helps him, and the more she does things for him, and the more useful she is to him. And I'm not a big fan of that. All in all, I do like him better than I liked him in the first book, but our main lad is still very selfish and very prideful. And even though these are the things that I would describe him most as after reading this, neither of these things are things that actually get addressed throughout the book. They are never things that he tries to fix or he tries to overcome. It's never part of his character arc. The fault he works to overcome in this book is that he wants so badly to protect everybody all the time, which is really pretentious. And his fallout with Henry too, while it was something, at least, it never changed the balance of their relationship, and Henry, even at the end of their fight, says that he's fine with how things are, and he's sorry for being so upset, and then they just return to the same situation that they were in before, which is essentially Henry does all the work, and Philip reaps all the benefit. It was addressed almost as if it was there just to address it, to be able to move on without people bringing it up and being like, that's problematic and I don't like that. But with Henry being gone now, at least for the time being, I don't know if I'm entirely convinced that they would kill off his best friend, his mom, and his other friend. It will be interesting in the next book to see how he lives with his blindness, especially after he's gotten so used to not having to live with it. But I do swear, if the next book starts off and he just has somebody else who is now putting in his sight so he can see all the time, I'm gonna flip a freaking table. Also, the fact that so much trauma has happened to this kid means that he now has PTSD. I know this not because through the narrative I was able to pick up on it, through his panic attacks, through his stress, through his reactions to situations, through how he's changed. No. I know this because I was told it at least 10 times, no exaggeration. The villain is only not as bad as the last one because she has significantly less screen time than the last one. Her motivations are never clearly laid out, which feels really lazy, in part because it just is lazy, but even more so because this lady, like the last villain, whenever she's around Philip, she just can't help herself and has to monologue for like 10 minutes. So the fact that her motivations were never revealed is kind of odd, and unless they reveal them in a later book or comic book, I'm gonna have to count that as a major sin. The cover makes her seem a lot cooler than she ends up being, which is really disappointing, and I wish there had been a lot more scenes and tensions with her using her powers. I wish that first scene with the airplane had a lot more to do with her using her specific powers rather than just the engines going out for some reason. This book also took a huge disconnect from the last one. Anything left open in the last book just never comes up again. Never comes up here. The prophecy? Over, I guess. Donnie? Not dead, but also very much gone. All the stigma towards the disabled kids? vanished. The struggle to master their powers and prove themselves? Gone, because apparently they did that all in between these books. The believers? Who? So this one's kind of hard. On my rating scale, I want to rate it somewhere between 3 and 4, but I think 3.5 might be too generous, because I definitely disliked it. I think I almost hated it too, but it was also fine. I'll just settle at a solid 3. It is a solid 3. And that's actually really good, considering that the last one was a 1.5. So this one almost doubled its score, so good for it. I hope the next book will get up a little higher. Maybe we can get that sucker to a 5. Yeah, so these are my thoughts and opinions on the newest edition of the Abel's Saga from CinemaSins, Jeremy Scott. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked this video, please leave a like. Please comment below. Please subscribe also if you'd like to hear more. I do have a couple more videos that I'm working on that I'm really excited to share, so I hope you will all stick around to see those. Please let me know what you thought of this, this book. Did you like this book? Have you read this book? What did you think of this book? And let me know if you think that I'm being too harsh, or if any of these things bother you just as much as they bothered me. For now, I'm a nerd, and that was my blurb. So apparently Bentley's dad was helping the evil lady the whole time. That's another thing that happens in this book. And he was doing this because she could make him more powerful, put him in like the actual US government. But like, why? Why did she need him? He doesn't help her at all during this book. We know he's a jerk. We've always known he was a jerk, but there's a big disconnect between just being a jerk and being able to betray your entire race to somebody who wants to imprison all of them. Plus, he's a superhero, and they can now identify superheroes through their DNA, so he's gonna get caught eventually. And if he is not a bad guy, why did he leave that number on his computer? What was that number on his computer? Why did it lead to that book? Why was it a Dewey Decimal number? Why did the book lead to Chicago? What did it mean? What was it supposed to lead them to? Why was this never explained?